History Channel.
In December 1944, the men of the U.S. Army's 66th Infantry Division were stationed in these barracks at Piddlehinton, Dorset, in the rolling English countryside. Newly arrived from the United States, they were homesick and nervous. Suddenly, orders came to ship out. This would be their first time in combat. Reinforcements were needed for the Battle of the Bulge, raging in Belgium, the veteran German Army's blitzkrieg in a last-ditch effort to win the war. At Southampton, they came to this dock in the middle of the night. A terrible tragedy lay ahead. In the second biggest American sea disaster of World War II, over 800 of these young men, mostly 18 to 20-year-olds, would not make it to the French coast alive. Officially, they are still missing in action. But they are not missing. They never have been. They are here, entombed 200 feet under the sea, where they died together in a disaster so horrible and unnecessary that it was hidden from the families of the dead men and the American public for 50 years. The 534-foot Belgian ocean liner SS Leopoldville was built in 1929. During the 1930s, it was put into service as a luxury passenger ship on the profitable route between Antwerp and the Belgian colony of the Congo. Her passengers were served by a large crew of 237, and its rich interiors, copied from a Belgian chateau, made the ship very popular among its mainly wealthy clientele. During the summer months, the liner was used as a cruise ship, sailing to ports of call all over the Mediterranean and Baltic seas. Belgian Captain Charles Limbour was put in command of the ship at the outbreak of the war. The British Admiralty converted the luxury liner into a troop ship by removing its rich appointments, adding guns, and transforming the cargo holds into sleeping quarters. With its Belgian crew and British gunners, the Leopoldville spent the next 5 years on convoy duty, running the gauntlet of German Luftwaffe and U-boats. In December 1944, as the end of the war appeared near, Captain Limbour and his crew looked forward to finally returning home to liberated Belgium. But then, suddenly,
the Christmas season of 1944, nobody was predicting that the war would end by Saturday night. The Army had come fast and far last fall. We had developed a certain tendency to become complacent. In December, we learned all over again the bitter lesson of war. We lost men, 78,000 in dead, wounded, and missing.
Now equipped with snorkels, the German U-boats were ordered into the English Channel for the first time. Their mission was to cut the Allied supply lines from England to the American Army in Belgium. The new snorkels enabled the submarines to stay submerged for long periods of time and operate in shallow waters with a lower risk of detection. Their main target was Cherbourg, the only operational port in Allied hands in Northern Europe. On December 23rd, U-486, commanded by Gerhard Meyer, opened fire just 7 miles off the French coast and sunk the 6,000-ton British ship Silver Laurel. The next day, Christmas Eve, the Leopoldville was was ordered to Southampton to transport soldiers to General Eisenhower's embattled army in Belgium. The loading operation started off badly. In the confusion and haste at dockside, another army unit had been loaded on the ship, instead of the 66th. These men had to be taken off. Reloading would begin at 2:30 a.m. and last all night.
Boarded the Leopoldville in Southampton, and was immediately sent up to the bow of the ship in a mess hall, looked like a mess hall, with bunks in it.
Units were mixed. In the morning, the passenger list was found to be incomplete. The British port authorities decided it was too late to correct the error and ordered the ship to sail on the morning tide, grossly overloaded with 2,235 soldiers.
It was supposed to be a fast crossing as far as I know. The sailing date had been changed as far as I understand. We were supposed to sail on Christmas Day, but they'd heard of rumours of submarines in the channel and had changed it to Christmas Eve.
The Leopoldville was met by its British escort, 4 destroyers under the charge of Commander John Pringle. Anti-submarine air patrols were not provided for the convoy. For the first time in his 6 months of channel duty, Pringle was ordered to sail a zigzag course, a measure used to confuse the German submarines, but adding hours to the voyage. Aboard the Leopoldville, no lifeboat, fire, or emergency drills were held during the crossing. The soldiers were not even instructed on how to put on their life jackets, even though Pringle's destroyers made 3 submarine sonar contacts within the first few hours and launched 1 depth charge attack. Outside Cherbourg Harbor waited Gerhard Meyer and U-486.
We did not know exactly where we were supposed to be debarking. And at approximately 6:30 that evening, we were about 5 miles from the coast of Cherbourg, and we were hit with a torpedo.
Torpedo struck, we didn't really know what it was, whether it was a torpedo or a mine, but the ship seemed to just stop in the middle of the ocean, and many of the hammocks came tumbling down, so we all scrambled for a life vest and ran up to our stations on the deck of the ship.
There was another rumble, and the hull shook, and I was thrown out into the passageway, and the door closed behind me. And the door when it closed, was jammed. I never was able to get the door open, and I lost a friend there, who was stuck in the cabin.
On the destroyer Brilliant, Convoy Commander Pringle swung into action. Within minutes of the attack, he sent his first radio message to British Fleet Headquarters in England, giving a situation report and his position. Pringle's ship radio could not contact nearby Cherbourg because it could not tune to the frequencies used by the American-controlled port.
We had a lot of difficulty in communicating. Our ship's radio, from what I understand, was beamed to Liverpool, England. And it took quite some time before they could get a message over to Cherbourg that we needed assistance.
10 minutes later, Pringle sent another message to England. He was ordering all of his destroyers to hunt down the German submarine, standard British Navy escort operating procedure. The Leopoldville, with 2,235 men on board, was left alone, drifting into mines, its propeller shafts broken. Both his urgent messages to Fleet Headquarters in England were tragically mishandled, and never relayed to Cherbourg by British Navy headquarters. Despite the destroyer's barrage of depth charges, Gerhard Meyer and U-486 managed to slip away.
I don't have to tell you that I was scared as hell. I was very, very scared. And when we get up on top, and as cold as it was, and standing on that deck, and I looked up that sky, and it was black, you know, with them a couple stars up there, and boy, I started saying more Hail Marys than you ever heard of. And I told God if he'd ever get me off of that boat, that I'd become a priest. I wouldn't chase any more women. I wouldn't cuss. I wouldn't drink. And I'd become a monk, you know. But then I broke all them vows.
Amazingly enough, there was no commotion. Of course, we were all alerted and all anxious, but we sort of held our composure. Nobody got panicky. The officers more or less held their ground and kept us in line. And gradually got us above decks.
The American soldiers in the world up below me behaved impeccably. They was all packed like sardines below me. They all just stood practically at attention.
30 minutes later, Pringle returned and signaled the Leopoldville, asking what she was transporting. He was shocked when Captain Limbour signaled back that he had troops on board. 4,000 he wrongly estimated. It was only then that the British commander discovered he was even escorting troops. He flashed an order to the Leopoldville. For the first time, 40 minutes after the torpedo hit, did Pringle try to contact Cherbourg for help, just 5 miles away.
And we were drifting into a minefield. So they had to drop the anchor to prevent us from going into the minefield. Now, once they dropped that anchor, they couldn't have towed us in with tugs. If they had dropped the tugs, they did, in other words, if they, it's just my thinking, but it seems to me if they had brought the tugs out quick enough, they could have beached us, you know.
After seeing this message flashed from the bridge of the Leopoldville to the Brilliant, panic spread through Belgian Captain Limbour's crew, and, without orders to abandon ship, they ran for the lifeboats.
We were getting assurance that boats were coming from Cherbourg, 5.5, 6 miles away, to tow us in. We saw the crew come aboard deck, come above deck, with their bird cages, suitcases, and so on, lower the lifeboats and take off. They deserted the ship.
When we finally got on the top deck, none of the personnel from the Leopoldville were on that deck. They were in their lifeboats. They were gone. And we, what the hell can we do here? And some of those life rafts, they were still hanging there, but you couldn't get them down because you couldn't even move them. I don't know whether it was broken on those hangers or what. I don't know. You couldn't get them all. And all the life rafts, they're gone. They were gone.
You know, I think at the time, if we had had rifles and with ammunition, we would have shot them as they left the ship. But unfortunately, our rifles were down below, and we had no ammunition at that time either.
I don't know if I should say this or not, but Sergeant Hess was on one side of me and I was on the other side, and these two Belgian crews had the suitcases and ready to jump before a lot of the GIs. And Hesse looked at me and I looked at him, and we bumped them overboard because we wanted the GIs to have more room. So after what happened to them, I don't know, but they went down between the ships.
Knowing the Leopoldville was in danger, and with no rescue boats on the scene, Pringle decided to bring his destroyer alongside and take off some soldiers.
And then the HMS Brilliant came on the starboard side and went through lines and held steady to the Leopoldville.
And then a lot of the fellows were starting to jump off the ship onto the destroyer. The only bad feature was the waves were real high. Sometimes there was 20, 30 feet difference in distance from the top of the ship to the bottom of the destroyer.
I'm noticing the red fluids on the ships. My God, that man was crushed to death. There's blood all over the side of the ship. And that sort of shook me up. I don't know what the hell to do with that at that time.
And I decided it was my turn to try to get up on the rail, and I did the same thing, and I jumped. And I landed on the Brilliant, and I turned around and I couldn't believe my eyes. The next deck up, it was jammed with people. There were still, I thought, I was naive, thought that we had pretty well cleared the ship just from the area that I was seeing. And they were mobbed along the next rail up, next deck up, and back there were more.
After 1 hour of taking off troops, the HMS Brilliant headed for port. Exactly how many men it got off will never be known. Reports range from 400 to 1,000. Pringle himself estimated 700. As the ship started to pull away, he received one last signal from the bridge of the Leopoldville. Imperative we abandon ship. Pringle later claimed at his board of inquiry that he never received this message, though it was written in his ship's log. Almost 2 hours had passed since the torpedo hit, and now night had fallen.
You could still hear men screaming, or yelling as they were trying to make the jump, or as they made the jump, and there were some men who were successful in making the jump. I don't know how many people the Brilliant took off this way, but then they left and left us alone.
There were men crawling all over that ship still. And by then there were men in the water because they were jumping without any thought of trying to get on board the ship now, because the ship was pulling away. The Brilliant was pulling away. There were men all over the place.
The troop ship Leopoldville was now slowly sinking by the stern into the icy waters of the English Channel, its rear decks awash. As the HMS Brilliant entered Cherbourg harbor, the American port authorities finally responded with a flashing signal to Pringle. It had taken the port over 2 hours to get rescue boats underway.
We called for help. They couldn't get us to help right away because some of the GIs or whoever that were on schedule for duty that night were out celebrating. And it took quite a while before some help come out there to get some of those people out of that water.
If they knew there was troops coming across, they should be on the alert. They never know what's going to happen. Instead of having parties, they should have all the men, on standby. So in case something happens, they could get out there fast. They didn't do it.
I think these people had just decided this is Christmas and I'm taking a night off from the war. And there was nobody to tell them, no, you can't take a night off. You can't all take a night off. There was nobody, there was no really efficient officer left to sum up the situation, to see all the SOSs that were coming in, to know that the boats had been torpedoed, and to send out boats to find out.
The undermanned rescue boats and tugs, some with only a 2-man crew, finally reached the Leopoldville where the remaining 1,600 GIs were stranded without lifeboats. But it was too late. Men were already jumping off the ship into the waters.
I stayed on the ship until the steam started coming off the boilers, and I figured it was time to go. I found a rope, went down the side of the ship on a rope, floated into a mass of men that were in the water.
While I was in the water, I had a group of people come over, try to hold on to me, and They were fighting for their life. It was a little cold out there at that time of day. Don't remember how cold it was. I fought those people off, and then the last thing I remember doing was shoving a big plank in between my legs and then screaming for my mother.
I did think I was going to die. A few times. I was so cold, my hands and that was going numb. And when I looked back, and at one time I could see 100 men behind me, and the next time I looked, there wasn't a soul.
In the meanwhile, this is probably 3.5 hours. I was in the water somewhere close to 30 minutes before I got picked up. Salt bodies floating by. By that time, men had frozen to death or drowned. We had been told 22 to 30 minutes was max survival time because of the temperature of the water. And like I say, it took 3 hours or better for rescue vessels to come that 5.5, 6 miles to get us.
At about 9 o'clock at night, after a final loud bang caused by the bulkheads breaking, the Leopoldville went to the bottom.
Now this was about approximately 4 hours after it was hit. It was pretty dark. You couldn't see the hand in front of you. It was a pitch black night. And the waves weren't that high, but still it was pretty good. And then we started to fish these people in, as many as we can get.
I was in the water for quite a period of time, it seemed, because I was drifted past many of the rescue ships. There were so many men in the water at one time, and that was part of the problem. If they had brought the ships out, the rescue ships out, in an orderly fashion, and had gotten the men to go into the water in an orderly fashion, many more could have been rescued, but everybody was in the water almost at the same time.
We didn't save the bulk of them. We had maybe 50 men that we took in, but there were a lot of them that made it, you know, on French boats, Coast Guard boats. There were a lot of people in the channel that night picking up people.
I'd say we got about maybe 40. It's but you got to remember, they are very heavy. That's the heaviest thing on earth to do, is try to, because they're soaked with that heavy coat on, and plus these people had rifles and their in fact I'd say half of them had their all their personal stuff with them.
The rescue boats worked all night, but a man could not live long in the icy winter waters. 1 hour after the Leopoldville went down, hardly anyone in the water was still alive.
The next morning they brought in what bodies they could pick up from the water, and they just stacked them up on the shoreline there, just like logs. It just tore your heart out to see your buddies laying there dead, frozen stiff, dead.
And that's all they kept telling us, is to lay them out like cordwood, right along, because the dock was long, and they laid. It's even hard to guess how many we laid out there.
Oh, I couldn't count it. There was plenty of what the French had picked up, what other boats had picked up, what our own government had picked up. The bodies were just up there for you to take a look and try to identify.
Bodies were washing up on shore for the next couple of weeks. But I didn't see anybody I knew, and I kind of lost heart. I didn't want to really find anybody I knew.
Somebody told me these Army Air Corps low boys trailers were brought in, and they loaded the bodies on there and took them to the general hospital first, where they tagged them, done whatever they were supposed to do, and then they took them to St. Mary Cemetery. So about a week later, I went to St. Mary Glee Cemetery, because that's not too far either from where I was. And sure enough, they were all buried there. And I tried to find out exactly how many there were. But nobody would say nothing. Nobody would say how many there were. Nobody would even say who it was. You know, it was just soldiers, period.
Many of the over 1,000 secret documents on the Leopoldville were declassified in 1996. Only the high-ranking admirals and generals of Allied command, whose names appear on these pages, will ever know why they were sealed for 50 years. But where the cover-up started and how it was maintained is now clear. In January 1945, 2 weeks after the sinking, the British Admiralty sent a message to General Eisenhower, insisting that in order to keep the morale of the U-boat fleet low, the Leopold disaster be kept in strict silence. Eisenhower agreed with the British and sent a message to Washington ordering any public statement made about the disaster be cleared through himself and Admiralty. The generals in Washington disagreed. They wrote back that consistent War Department policy was to release the facts of a ship sinking whenever the loss of American military personnel was large. But Eisenhower and Admiralty got their way. The next of kin would not be informed, nor any statements released about the disaster. In a startling reversal of policy, the War Department caved in and agreed to release no information about the sinking. Notification telegrams were finally sent out to the next of kin 3 weeks later, stating only that the men were missing in action in the European area.
We were told explicitly not to say a word about the mess that we were in, and the neglect and the lack of communications. But then again, it was war, and those things do happen.
Myself and other officers in the company got letters from families that wanted to know how. And we weren't able to tell them. We were under strict orders that the subject was not to be discussed. So we wrote as best we could and said, your son or your husband died doing his duty. But we were not free to give them any information as to what had happened.
I tried to write letters here, and no more I'd write out something in a letter, they'd go to work and censor it. They'd throw it away. And then the lieutenant would come up to you and say, hey, are you sick? Do you feel right? I said, what do you mean? You're not supposed to write home about this in your letters. I just want to let them know what happened to us. You're not allowed to tell them what happened to us that night. This was it. They would not let us know.
The U.S. Office of Inspector General conducted an investigation into the Leopoldville. It lasted just 5 days, and the mere 2-page report found both British authorities at Southampton and the Belgian crew negligent, but not one American on the Cherbourg rescue operation.
Admiral Stark oversaw the investigation and okayed it, and it was a sloppy investigation. Eisenhower okayed the secretiveness, not letting it out. There are letters signed by him, although I wasn't allowed to see him then at the time, nor at that time was I allowed to see the Stark thing. But I was allowed to see enough of the investigations to know how badly they were done.
In contrast to the Americans, the British Admiralty conducted a thorough, secret inquiry into the disaster. After 2 weeks of hearings, the board found the Belgian crew and Captain Limbourg negligent. Commander John Pringle, captain of the Brilliant, was found partly responsible for the loss of 300 additional lives. For this and other errors in judgment, they disciplined him and transferred him to another ship. However, 1 month later, Pringle and his crew received a secret commendation for his gallant action from an unexpected source. An American general.
The Americans in Cherbourg were negligent. The British convoy commander was negligent. The Belgians were not only negligent, they were really foul.
Later, in another strange twist, the Admiralty denied the findings of their own investigation and completely exonerated the Belgians.
The Board of Inquiry was of the opinion that the master, ship's officers and crew carried out their duties in accordance with the highest traditions of the Belgian Marine.
I think the real purpose of the silence was maybe not to hide the event, but not to embarrass our allies, perhaps, to avoid really facing this. You just call it an act of war, and there it goes, and that explains away a lot of things.
The cover-up continued after the war, but the press heard rumors of the disaster from survivors' accounts.
Before we reached the shore, the United States, we were told that the newspaper people would be at the docks and they would be asking questions. We could admit, yes, we were on the Leopoldville, or we were in the 66th Infantry Division. But other than to give any description of what happened or details, we were not to do so. After all, I was an officer and I have to follow the wishes of my superiors, which I did.
In 1946, the New York Times and Reuters began investigations into the Leopoldville sinking, based on survivors' accounts circulating in America. From the Reuters London office, the British journalist Ronald Bedford wrote the Admiralty for information.
I went down to investigate the background to the sinking of the Belgian liner Leopoldville. At first, the Admiralty were giving me some information, but later on, some weeks after, I was called down again and told that, well, they were sorry, but there was no more that they could tell me. And this was indeed followed up by a letter to me from Admiralty confirming that there was no more help that they could give.
The British Admiralty's policy on the status of the Leopoldville was decided by Richard Royal Powell, head of Military Branch 2, in a memo dated 19th March 1946, almost 1 year after the end of the war in Europe. They would remain classified for the next 50 years.
The story of the Leopoldville does not reflect any great credit upon us, and I should be averse from disclosing it until the need is very strong. To issue anything publicly now in America might only serve to revive a controversy which would be better allowed to die.
The events that took place that Christmas Eve, 1944, have been engraved into the memories of the men who survived the watery death of the Leopoldville. They have lived with their secret nightmare now for more than half a century.
Well, there's where the anger comes in. Especially that one letter that I got that this guy was close to me and he wrote to his family about me, you know, you know, I was a good friend of his and all that. And then when he died and disappeared, then I asked them, I said, what did they tell you? He said, just missing in action. That's all the news they did. They didn't know the heartache and the thing of what happened that night. And that was a happening. They didn't know nothing about that. And how in the world, and even I was on there, I could never tell them. I'd never met them or anything. They knew, but if I ever met them and everything, I would lie about it. I'd tell them, oh, he just got hit and he died a hero, you know. I'd never tell him what happened there, that he was abandoned and that dang on brought him in there in that ship and he went down with it. I could never tell him that.
When I did get letters that I received at my home, and they got that information from the New York Times. My name was the one that spoke that came in, that I had returned and was with the 66th Infantry Division. I wrote a letter to those people, whether it was the wife or the mother, and I just explained that I didn't know their son, but there was a tragedy, and that's it. I couldn't go into details because I wasn't authorized.
It was done with absolutely no compassion. I can't imagine that what could be worse for morale than sending somebody a letter saying your son or your husband is missing in action. When he isn't missing in action, he's dead and you know it. And you still send that.
My mother got his Purple Heart from when he was killed in action, and that's all that it said on it, that he died of wounds received in the European theater. But nobody ever said really what happened to him, except that he had died of wounds, and they never found his body. So, you know, I mean, I don't know how they would have known how he died, except that they didn't ever find anything.
After my brother was killed in service, it took years off my parents' life. And when he went, like, it affected every one of us. We loved him very much. It was hard to believe that he wasn't coming home. Well, we really didn't know what happened until I started digging and to find out what happened. And little by little, the story is coming together.
For almost 3 years after her son's death, Reginald Clark's mother wrote letters to the Army and her congressman, demanding information on her missing son. The Army never told her the truth.
And it's very important to me because it's something that I've wanted to know all my life. It's something that I think every parent or family would want to know. And they should start asking questions.
Was it after we read the article in the Tampa papers when things finally came together and you could start to figure out what had happened? 50 years later.
The waters over the Leopoldville are still swirling. The anger has not settled. Memories burn bright of that Christmas Eve more than a half-century ago. Memories of death. Of the 2,235 GIs who boarded the ship at Southampton, over 800 would die. No one is sure of the exact figures, since the passenger list was incomplete. Another 600 were wounded in the second largest sea disaster for U.S. forces in all the Second World War. Here, on the Wall of the Missing, in the U.S. Military Cemetery at Omaha Beach, are engraved the names of the 1,557 men listed as missing from the D-Day landings and the Battle of Normandy. Above their names is engraved the words, "Brothers in Arms, whose final resting place is known but to God." Almost half the names on this wall are the men of the 66th Division who died on the Leopoldville. But there is no mention of this ship disaster, here or any other place. It is hidden, but not forgotten.
They're not missing in action. Everybody knows where they are. They're buried with the ship, the same as the bodies who were recovered are buried in military cemeteries there at Cherbourg.
Here, the seafloor lies the wreck of the Leopoldville, lying on its side in 200 feet of cold, dark water. Two at the point of the torpedo's impact, but with the hull and guns still intact. There are no longer any visible human remains, only their long-lost possessions, helmets, rifles, bayonets. Chain to the dropped anchor recalls the failed struggle to survive. Ladders used for escape from below decks are still in place, just as they were that fateful night of Christmas Eve, 1944. An underwater grave of soldiers going to battle, but the battle came to them first.
To me, that's their burial place. That's their cemetery. The fact that there are no white crosses or anything still doesn't mean that that's not their burial place.
I can remember details exactly as they happened. Even though I'm 72 years old now, my mind is clear as a bell, and it comes back to me every Christmas.
I have tried for 50 years to forget this thing, and it wasn't until the end of the 50 years that I finally came clean with myself and realized that all I was doing was burying it.
It was, I don't know, just was sort of a secret. I didn't really talk a whole lot about it to anyone. I did tell my family and some close friends, but that was about it.
In my opinion, my personal opinion is that I'd rather know the truth than for someone to deceive me. Tell me what it is. I can adjust to that. But if I'm adjusting to something where it's got a lot of question marks hanging onto it, you just can't make any closure on it at all.
800 Americans went down with that ship, and they would not tell the people about it. That's wrong. There's something wrong. A lot of American people was hurt because they did not know what happened. What happened to their sons? Husbands. They did not know what happened.
They died unnecessarily, and the people who were really responsible for their death have just gotten away with it to an extent that I don't think any of them even have a guilty conscience. They are allowed by the system of secrecy, of not pushing for details, to go along about their lives and not care.
I still think it was a travesty of justice. It never should have happened. We shouldn't have had the loss, the torpedo, and sure, those things happen. That's an act of war. But the way it was handled and the way it was mishandled after it occurred, there's no forgiveness.